Chapter 2, Section 2 of the Greek View of Life by Goldsworthy Lowes Dickinson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Chapter 2, Section 2. The relation of the state to the citizen. First, let us consider the relation of the state to the citizens, that is to say, to that portion of the community, usually a minority, which was possessed of full political rights. It is here that we have the key to that limitation of size which we have seen to be essential to the idea of the city-state. For in the Greek view, to be a citizen of a state did not merely imply the payment of taxes and the possession of a vote. It implied a direct and active cooperation in all the functions of civil and military life. A citizen was normally a soldier, a judge, and a member of the governing assembly, and all his public duties he performed not by deputy but in person. He must be able frequently to attend the centre of government, hence the limitation of territory. He must be able to speak and vote in person in the assembly, hence the limitation of numbers. The idea of representative government never occurred to the Greeks, but if it had occurred to them, and if they had adopted it, it would have involved a revolution in their whole conception of the citizen. Of that conception, direct personal service was the cardinal point, service in the field as well as in the council. And to substitute for personal service the mere right to a vote would have been to destroy the form of the Greek state. Such being the idea the Greeks had formed, based on their own experience, of the relation of the citizen to the state, it follows that to them a society so complex as our own would hardly have answered to the definition of a state at all. Rather, they would have regarded it as a mere congeries of unsatisfactory human beings, held together partly by political, partly by economic compulsion, but lacking that conscious identity of interest with the community to which they belong, which alone constitutes the citizen. A man whose main preoccupation should be with his trade or his profession, and who should only become aware of his corporate relations when called upon for his rates and taxes, a man, that is to say, in the position of an ordinary Englishman, would not have seemed to the Greeks to be a full and proper member of a state. For the state to them was more than a machinery, it was a spiritual bond. And public life, as we call it, was not a thing to be taken up and laid aside at pleasure, but a necessary and essential phase of the existence of a complete man. This relation of the citizen to the state, as it was conceived by the Greeks, is sometimes described as though it involved the sacrifice of the individual to the whole, and in a certain sense perhaps this is true. Aristotle, for instance, declares that no one must suppose he belongs to himself, but rather that all alike belong to the state. And Plato, in the construction of his ideal republic, is thinking much less of the happiness of the individual citizens than of the symmetry and beauty of the whole, as it might appear to a disinterested observer from without. Certainly it would have been tedious and irksome to any but his own ideal philosopher to live under the rule of that perfect polity. Individual enterprise, bent, and choice is rigorously excluded. Nothing escapes the net of legislation, from the production of children to the fashion of houses, clothes, and food. It is absurd, says the ruthless logic of this mathematician among the poets, for one who would regulate public life to leave private relations uncontrolled. If there is to be order at all, it must extend through and through. No moment, no detail must be withdrawn from the grasp of law. And though in this Plato, no doubt, goes far beyond the common sense of the Greeks, yet he is not building altogether in the air. The republic which he desiderates was realised, as we shall see, partially at least, in Sparta. So that his insistence on the all-pervading domination of the state, exaggerated though it be, is exaggerated on the actual lines of Greek practice, and may be taken as indicative of a real distinction and even antithesis between their point of view and that which prevails at present in most modern states. But on the other hand, such a phrase as the sacrifice of the individual to the whole, to this extent at least, is misleading, that it presupposes an opposition between the end of the individual and that of the state, such as was entirely foreign to the Greek conception. The best individual in their view was also the best citizen. The two ideals were not only not incompatible, they were almost indistinguishable. When Aristotle defines a state as an association of similar persons for the attainment of the best life possible, he implies not only that society is the means whereby the individual attains his ideal, but also that that ideal includes the functions of public life. The state, in his view, is not merely the convenient machinery that raises a man above his animal wants, and sets him free to follow his own devices. It is itself his end, or at least a part of it. And from this it follows that the regulations of the state were not regarded by the Greeks, as they are apt to be by modern men, as so many vexatious, if necessary, restraints on individual liberty, but rather as the expression of the best and highest nature of the citizen, as the formula of the conduct which the good man would naturally prescribe to himself. So that to get a clear conception of what was at least the Greek ideal, however imperfectly it may have been attained in practice, we ought to regard the individual not as sacrificed to, but rather as realising himself in the whole. We shall thus come nearer to what seems to have been the point of view not only of Aristotle and of Plato, but also of the average Greek man. End of chapter 2, section 2. Recording by Martin Geeson in Haslemere, Surrey.